Tom and Mark from Unsportsmanlike.ca. Big changes happening in Philly yesterday. Really, really shocking. I wasn't so much surprised about the Jeff Carter trade, but Mike Richards certainly. Mark, what were your thoughts on, first of all, the Carter trade?
Well, actually, going back a little bit, around a week ago, there were rumblings that the Philadelphia Flyers were going to move either Jeff Carter or Mike Richards. And when that came out, the Richards deals just seemed a little outlandish. It didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. But, as you said, I'm not too surprised that Jeff Carter got moved. Going to Columbus, which had been the rumored team, and initially it was the 8th and Voracek was the plan. And then on top
Do you
of
like
they
that
got
return? Is that, if you're a Philly fan, do you like that return?
I think it's okay. I think they could have done better, but at the same time, everyone knew that they were cap strapped. So that was more of a salary structured move to me, as opposed to a cultural change. And then moving.
That's
Richards
what they
out
said,
was
though. Paul
probably
Holmgren
a
is saying
cultural
that
change.
it wasn't, though. He was saying it wasn't a salary dump.
Well, it wasn't a pure salary.
But why do you
dump,
sign him for 11
but-
years then? You just did it.
Well, yeah, don't get me wrong. I think it's ridiculous that they signed both those players to lifetime contracts and then up and move them. I mean, to me, that says a lot about the direction of their organization, their loyalty of their organization. I mean, and on top of that, they moved those players out to make room for Bryzgalov and then sign him to a lifetime deal. Like, I wonder what he's thinking. He's,
Or how about Giroux or Van Riemsdyk when it comes time for them to be signed?
Exactly. In one way, Giroux's got to be happy because right now he's kind of expected to have more of a top line role, so to speak. But at the same time, you're right. How could he feel comfortable signing a long-term deal with them that if things go a little sour, they're just going to dump him?
How pissed would you be if you're Jeff Carter now? You just signed that deal, and now you're going
to
up.
Columbus.
Yeah, which nothing.
It's not the most desirable.
Or
team
even
to
if
go
it is,
to.
it's not where you committed, right? It's
Yeah. I mean, Richards is in that boat too, but at least Carter, he'll get to play with Nash and he'll see RJ Umberger again, and so maybe it'll fit all right. But you're right. I mean, you're going from what many would call a contender in Philly to Columbus, who's made the playoffs once in their franchise's history and got swept. So he can't be overly thrilled with that. He probably feels as though they built something together in Philly. They just lost in the Cup Finals last year, and obviously had the debacle this year in the playoffs. But they were supposedly trying to address that, and he probably didn't think that it would be at his expense.
All right, and with the Mike Richards trade, do you like the return that they got? Braden Shen, obviously a prospect that's pretty highly regarded, and if he pans out, it might turn into a pretty good trade. If he doesn't, then not so sure, but what do you think?
Well, I think you gotta, everyone likes Braden Shen and thinks he's going to be great, and that's all fine and good. He very well might be. And Wayne Simmons was maybe overvalued a little bit by LA. They didn't seem to want to part with him in numerous trade rumors earlier this year, or last season, I suppose. But tack on the additional draft pick, and part of it to me was a culture change in Philly, and they did pretty well here. The only thing that's a little, off-putting is that now Philly did all this stuff to clear some cap space, sign Bryzgalov, and now they have Voracek, who's a restricted free agent. You've got a $3 and change million cap hit if Braden Shen were to play on the roster, and Wayne Simmons is also a restricted free agent. So by the time they sign those couple of players for a couple $1 million each, what kind of space are they looking at?
What about the rumors that were circulating yesterday that the Maple Leafs were offered a chance at Mike Richards, and they desperately need a center for Nazem Kadri and Nikolai Kulemin?
Yeah, well, I guess essentially the way it worked out was that first Paul Holmgren contacted the Leafs and said that for Kulemin and Kadri, they could have Carter. The Leafs shot that down. Then Philadelphia turns around, makes a deal with Columbus. Then Paul Holmgren comes back and says, well, same deal. We'll give you Mike Richards now for Kulemin and Kadri.
Why was he shopping Richards, though? Why would he be making that call? Wouldn't it be the other... shouldn't it have been the other way? That if you were going to trade your captain and your 26-year-old pillar of the franchise, that other people are blowing the door down and you're like, okay, at this point, I like this return, I got to do it, but it's not in the cards.
Well,
when you're making the phone calls, it's bizarre.
Well, honestly, to me, it's a big cultural change in Philly. The fans were not overly thrilled with Mike Richards, how he handled the media, and the perception of how much he cared for Philly anymore. So I think that was a shakedown that was going to happen regardless. But you're right. I mean, to me, Mike Richards is a guy that you don't just turn around and move. You don't shop him around. If someone comes and blows you out of the water with a great deal, then yeah, fine, maybe you think about it. But you're right. I wouldn't have done that either. But they want to move in a new direction, and their window to win is now. When you look at the age of Pronger, look at the age of Kimmo Timonen, they got to make a move now before they have to restructure their defense. And that's assuming that they don't move anyone else off their blue line, which is not a guarantee. Carl or Colburn, most likely I think they would prefer to move Carl, but those guys could be moved.
All right, so would you make that trade, though, if you were Brian Burke? You get a phone call, boom, you got to decide right now. Yeah?
To me,
Why?
Well, Kuhlman is definitely an unbelievable talent. You know, he's 30-goal scorer last season. He's getting better, and he could be a real player. And Nazem Kadri showed flashes of being an NHL caliber player already. But at the same time, wingers, 30-goal scoring wingers, as few and far between as they may be, are more easily replaced than coming up with a legit top center who can, who already has shown you his leadership abilities. He's gone to the Cup Finals, and they lost, narrowly losing that final. To me, Richards is a guy that comes around a lot less often than a Kuhlman or even a Kadri. So to me, I'd make that move.
Kadri, a former 7th overall pick, he was just slightly under a point a game in the American League, and he got kind of bounced around like a yo-yo by the Leafs this past season, but he did show some promise towards the end, and he has the capability of, the guy's skilled. He just scores some really nice goals. He's a really nice passer. Not really clear yet if he can be the two-way player that Mike Richards is, or if he can play with the kind of physicality and the ability to shut down other centers, but potentially he could be, a better point producer than Mike Richards. Do you think Nazem Kadri will be a player in the league?
I think he certainly could be, but there's a time and a place to put all your eggs in the potential basket, right? Prospects are all nice and good, and everyone likes them because of what they may or may not turn out to be. But as I said, with Mike Richards, he is one of the premier two-way centers in this league. He still can put up points. He has so many more intangibles that he's already developed and already has. Kadri may very well turn into a nice point-producing center, but Richards is a guy that can play top-line minutes if you want him to. He can also play the second center and be extremely effective. The Leafs have a massive need for a top-line center, and it'd be a lot easier to replace wingers than it is to find a center in this league.
The other thing, though, if you're Brian Burke, they have Kadri, who's projected to be a center. They traded for Joe Colburn, who's a center as well. Yeah. Exactly. And now they've got 3 picks towards the end of the first round and 1 early in the second round. Do you think that they're thinking, and potentially making a play for Brad Richards, that they want to hold on to a 30-goal winger in Kuhlman that's a big, strong guy that appears to be even further on the upswing? Like, that 30-goal season this year didn't really seem like it was a career year, and he'll never be able to match that again. Yeah, it looks like he could potentially score 40.
The timing of this trade, or this trade scenario, really probably didn't exactly excite the Leafs management, because you're right, they still do have a chance to make a play at Brad Richards, and maybe they feel as though that asking price was too high today. If free agency had started, if this was July 5th and Brad Richards had already signed somewhere and he was no longer available, maybe the Leafs would make that trade. There's no question that the timing kind of throws an extra hurdle in the situation, but to me, when you just look at value for value in that deal, I would probably want to do it.
All right, now Andrei Markov re-signs with the Montreal Canadiens, 3 years, just over $5 million a year. For a guy that's barely played the last 2 years, does it seem like a bit of a stretch? Do you think he would have got that on the open market if they let him go there?
Yeah, to me, it's not really always fair to compare what a player signs for with a team that he's been playing with for a long time versus what he could get in the open market. Yeah, he would definitely been able to get that on the open market. There's always going to be a team out there who will overpay, especially offensive defensemen, but premier, quote-unquote, defensemen will get that money. Just the same way you could look at a forward who will be overpaid somewhere, but if he signed with his home team, he'd be taking, the proverbial hometown discount, which isn't always true. It's just that you don't have to overpay to get some players sometimes. To me, the fact he hasn't played too much in the last 2 years is really a big hurdle because, one, you don't know if he's going to be the player he once was when he comes back this season, and two, you don't know if he's going to be able to stay healthy. Maybe the Montreal Canadiens don't care about paying out this $15 million and change over 3 years if he were to, say, blow out his knee next season. So maybe the money isn't an issue, because in that situation, if he were to have to retire or be on LTIR, et cetera, they get some cap relief. But it was shocking that he got 3 years at that kind of money. I thought he would get, look at a 1-2 year deal at a slightly lower price range.
I'm concerned for his skating because he's a small guy to begin with. If he loses his speed, which is totally possible when you blow out a knee, sure. He could have the best hands in the world and the best shot, and sure, he'll quarterback your power play, but he'll be a liability defensively.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying. You don't know that the player you're getting today is the player that you had before the injuries.
Yeah.
And to pay him like a premier defenseman. Well, I mean, there are defensemen who make more, but in today's market, 5 and change is
it's a good chunk of money.
Yeah, it's the top level salary for a defenseman.
All right, now Brad Richards supposedly was asked to waive his no-trade clause by the Dallas Stars, refused to do so. Does that surprise you at all?
No, it's not, especially since it's taken so long from, I guess it was around 2 weeks ago, that Joe Nieuwendyk said that he was going to move Brad Richards because they were not going to re-sign him.
What does Brad Richards have to lose, though?
I think, you know what?
He doesn't have to sign. He's under no pressure. All it is just a negotiating window.
But the pressure to sign on that with that team, especially when he has a no trade, because essentially what would happen was the new team would say, hey, Joe Nieuwendyk, I'll give you this, that, and the other for, Brad Richards, his negotiating rights. And he'd say, yeah, okay, but he'd have to go to Brad Richards and say, hey, would you like a trade, would you accept a trade to Team X? And if he says, yeah, then they're going to want to talk to him.
What if he just says, I don't care? I don't care. Like, do whatever you want to do.
I think there's a little bit of added pressure on the player to sign to a team when he gets traded to them.
Is that fair, though?
No.
It's not, right?
No. But at the same time, it's not really, Dallas wanted to play both sides of the fence this season and kept him at the trade deadline when they should have moved him. And now here, because they know they're going to get nothing for him, want to squeeze something out of him and put the pressure on him. The onus shouldn't be on Brad Richards to take this deal to help Dallas out when they made the wrong decision.
I feel like Joe Nieuwendyk made a big mistake with how he's handled this whole thing, because he must have had some kind of idea that he wouldn't waive the no trade.
It's all coming down to money. They kept him back in March in the hopes that they could squeeze into the playoffs to make more revenue for their struggling franchise. When that didn't happen, they can't afford to pay Brad Richards money to keep him. Now they have to let him go. Now he's just trying to squeeze out whatever assets he can out of the deal. It's all about the owners and the money and the problems that Dallas is having. So yeah, you're right. It looks like Joe Nieuwendyk has really screwed this whole thing up. But at the end of the day, we don't know the internal pressure that's been put on him in terms of making these sort of decisions. So,
all right, NHL draft is happening tonight. Looks like 1 and 2 is the locks. Well, we'll see. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins and Adam Larsson. If you were the Edmonton Oilers right now, which one of those two players do you pick?
Well, I know that when it comes to the draft, you always want to take the best player available. Skill, hockey sense, etc. If it was clearly cut out that Nugent-Hopkins was that much better than Larsson, then yeah, you take Nugent-Hopkins. But sooner or later, you've got to look at your organizational needs. And to me, the Edmonton Oilers could definitely use a big, strong defenseman. On top of that, as you said earlier, we were talking about this today, Larsson's a right-handed shot.
So rare.
Yeah, and at 18 years old, the guy's 6'3", 205 pounds. You don't find that kind of size and a right-handed shot very often. I mean, look around the NHL free agency.
There's no really good offensive right-handed shot. Rafalski just retired. Mike Green can't play defense.
He's the only other one. That's
sure, and that's a stretch even.
Exactly, So to me, I would be taking Larsson if I were the Edmonton Oilers. But, who knows what they'll do.
I agree, and I don't understand why you hear people talking like they're definitely leaning towards Nugent-Hopkins, and they just drafted a center in Taylor Hall. They have Pajärvi. Sam Gagner is another center that's really young still. And they got Eberle. They're just stacked up front, and they have nothing on defense. They are absolutely... The cupboard is bare. Yeah. And they have an opportunity to grab... Not only is he a big, strong guy that can eventually quarterback a power play and move bodies around the net, right-hand shot like we talked about, but sometimes there's a fear about Europeans coming over, whether their game will translate to the smaller rink. But during the World Juniors last year, he was playing on the smaller rink, and he was dominant. He was the best defenseman in the tournament, and the small rink did not seem to affect his play at all.
I think the other thing to remember, too, is that sometimes when there's pre-draft talk and all this and that, sometimes the North American media overvalues North American players. It's built some hype, some interest to the story, to the draft, and that could be a little situation going on here. So they may be undervaluing Larsson when comparing him directly to Nugent-Hopkins. But at the end of the day, to me, you look at the needs of the Oilers, you look at the type of player you could be getting, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that does it for this edition of the Unsportsmanlike.ca podcast. Free agency just around the corner. We'll be back next week to break that down and the draft after tonight. Thanks a lot for joining us. We'll see you next time.